welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am Millie Duren. I am the education coordinator at the Trinidad History Museum in Trinidad, Colorado. So I do our kids programming, our adult education events, field trips, daily tours, things like that. All kind of falls into my wheelhouse. I've been in my position for about 3 years now. I am originally from Texas and then
Ooh.
moved to Trinidad, Colorado.
Wow, what brought you to Trinidad?
The job at the museum,
Oh, okay.
actually. I've always kind of loved Colorado. I had some kind of interesting coincidental family ties to the area. I had some grandparents who were originally from here that I never actually
Mm.
was able to meet. So when the job came up, it was kind of this like great cosmic coincidence of exactly what I was looking for, exactly the history that I wanted to continue learning and teaching about. Yeah.
I love that. So were they there for like mining or what was their reason for being there?
Yeah, more just kind of tracking family genealogy. They just kind of kept moving west and eventually
Hmm.
settled in southern Colorado. They were in the mining industry, in the steel industry. One was part of the like volunteer fire department, just kind of had their hands in a lot of different things.
Wow, what a great story. I love that. So can you tell me a little bit about how Trinidad got started?
Yeah, so Trinidad is on the Purgatory River, which is an offshoot of the Arkansas River.
Hmm.
And during early Santa Fe Trail days, kind of beginning in 1821 is when we technically put a start date to that Santa Fe Trail that connects Missouri to Santa Fe. The kind of first route that William Becknell, the kind of founder of the trail, as we call him, um, went through kind of Oklahoma, Texas, and into New Mexico. And there's not a lot of water on that way. So they eventually found what is known as the mountain route of the Santa Fe Trail, which actually cuts into Colorado and starts going south a little above Trinidad because there's a river. So Trinidad became this really important stop along the Santa Fe Trail because there was fresh water. You could stop and rest. There were people who could, repair your wagon for you, things like that. And so, because of that early traffic, it also just kind of became, with other travelers, a known place to stop and rest. So, when you get Felipe Baca coming through to trade, um, later indigenous peoples coming through to trade, Trinidad is just always kind of this known area with safe water. You're not necessarily in the mountains yet. You're able to stop and wait if there's bad weather coming, sort of things like that, that just made it this really popular pausing point.
And it's still a popular spot for that. I actually ended up last year when I was coming back in December back to Oklahoma. There was going to be some weather, and so Raton Pass is still
Mm-hmm.
much better than it was back then, but you still don't want to get caught up there during a storm. So I think I did stop over. I made it as far south as I could, and then decided to stop over. So that's still the case. Um, so tell me a little bit about Felipe Baca and what was his role? How did he find Trinidad?
So Felipe Baca was a merchant, rancher, again, had his hands in a lot of different industries, and he was originally from Mora County, New
Oh,
Mexico.
he was. Okay.
Yeah, somewhere like kind of Taos area. That's kind of the like most recognizable, I think, spot for people not from the area. So he was taking late 1850s, 1860. He's taking a load of flour and things up to a mining camp near present day Denver. And he stopped along the Purgatory. Again, that like resting place. If you know you have water, it's a fairly safe area for people, avoiding weather, things like that. And he notices that there's not a lot of permanent settlement in the area, that there's really fertile land, there's all of this stuff just naturally growing. And so he starts planting things. He kind of claims sections along the river, builds an irrigation ditch for everything that he farms, kind of continues up to Denver, does his thing, comes back and harvests in the fall, takes that all back to New Mexico and shows all of his neighbors and says, look at this great fertile area. Look at everything I was able to plant, in this one season. There's nobody else really here. Um, there's plenty of water, plenty of land. And he convinces 12 other families to move up to the area that we now call Trinidad with him and kind of settle the area. So when we do talk about like the founding of Trinidad, we talk about Felipe Baca and his family as like the founding father of the town.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by his story because I think it's so my family were all from New Mexico, and then 3 out of 4 of the lines ended up in southern Colorado.
Mhm.
Um, 2 of the lines went up through the San Luis Valley, and then one went up, I think, Trinchera Pass, the Trinchera that's like east of Trinidad, not the one that's west. Um, and but then I guess actually I don't know about the third one. Anyways, it is so it's unusual because it was frontier at that time. There wasn't a
Mhm.
lot out there. And they also went out there very early. And so you have to wonder, how did this happen? How did they know to go there? How did, so I think I love that story of Felipe Baca because it kind of fleshes that out a little bit that
Mhm.
if some of them were freighting or either running freight or working up there or grazing maybe into Colorado, that they sort of just saw this area. Now, at that time, was Colorado a territory by that point?
It was kind of after 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe
Mm,
Hidalgo and the Mexican
mm,
American War.
that's
It
right.
is
Okay.
part of the U.S. already.
Hmm. And then the Homestead Act wasn't till 1860.
Correct.
So we're at that time, was it all just sort of like, but if they were there before, because they weren't technically homesteading, and I know there was land grant stuff, I guess I haven't quite sorted that out in my mind.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
don't know.
there's definitely land grants in the area that are definitely affected by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Um, you've got kind of this just again area that isn't necessarily settled, and because there's now this tension between people who have been former Mexican citizens, now technically American citizens, um, that does get a little bit tricky in southern Colorado. It's a lot of like tracing maps and where does this land grant end and who is
Hmm.
technically allowed to keep that land, and things like that.
Yeah, so I guess that's my next question is who was there before? Were there Utes in that area? Was it like a hunting ground or
Yeah, there are definitely several indigenous tribes in the area. I I don't want to say the wrong incorrect number, but I know it's around 50 to 60 tribes that we kind of count as having, um, we acknowledge having traditional homelands and ties to the area that is now Colorado. In the area of Trinidad, and especially with the Santa Fe Trail, you have the Utes for sure. You've got the Jicarilla Apaches. You have several different groups that are moving around. The Comanches at one point have territory that encompasses present day Trinidad. So you have quite a few tribes that are using it for hunting grounds, already using the Santa Fe Trail and different systems to trade, to find food, to live on, and things like that. So there are definitely quite a few different tribes in the area. Just no kind of permanent settlement that the travelers and families from New Mexico kind of recognize as being in the area and being this kind of hindrance to where they wanted to settle.
Okay. So were there other settlements kind of along the river? Because I remember when I first started doing my genealogy research, there were those lines of mine that went up to it. The census record said like the east fork of the something something of the Purgatory River. And
Mhm.
so it took a while for me to kind of figure out where that actually was. And it's that Trinchera that's sort of directly east of Trinidad.
Mhm.
And last year we actually found that location of the original Trinchera Plaza, and it is on the river. There's hardly any river left over there, but you just have to wonder how do they find this spot or how they decide on this spot? So I was just wondering, and I think they were there as early as, I think they were there by 1870,
Mhm.
maybe even earlier. So were there settlements like along the river and Trinidad was just one of them, or was it just sort of that key location as it was right at the base of Raton Pass, the river's there that made it kind of a special location?
Yeah, I think definitely both. As you kind of look at the families that came with the Bacas or followed the Bacas, you see, especially west of Trinidad along Highway 12, which is a fairly popular
Mm,
scenic byway,
hmm
west and then loops around north of Trinidad. These little towns, and some of them are now ghost towns, some of them it doesn't really seem like maybe there's anything there. Sometimes you see like an old adobe church or an old adobe building that are the remnants of family plazas that were established along their trip to Trinidad. So that's where you get Valdez, Segundo, um, some other places along the river that kind of as they were traveling, they stopped to establish as their family's land.
Mm,
And then Trinidad, because it was kind of already established as the commerce hub with trade and things like that, they did eventually make their way there, at least in terms of business, trade, social things, stuff like that, where it needed that larger community. But they definitely settled kind of along the way. And then, yeah, even further east as well.
okay. So what was it that kind of, I know there was that commerce and then and then the Santa Fe Trail came through. And then when the
Mhm.
railroad came in, I'm kind of remembering from reading Sister Blandina's book that that was like this kind of the stopping point for a while. If you were coming from the east, it seems like they would come as far as Trinidad and then they would have to disembark and go by wagon or some other
Mhm.
means of transportation. Is that maybe another reason for kind of the growth and development of Trinidad as an important place was because that was at the end of the railroad line for a while?
For a while, for sure. You see this like boom of railroads connected to the boom of the mining industry.
Mm,
And with Trinidad being mainly coal mining, and it's just kind of unique geographic location, it is kind of tough to, at that time, build railroads further south to go that much further west over the same grade.
mhm,
It's just kind of this area where it does make sense to stop because it's been, so long established as this break point, as this trading spot. The Bacas create this general store very early on in the kind of history of their settlement in Trinidad. So it just kind of makes sense that it starts building up and is therefore kind of the railroad stop, which brings in even more people, kind of where the mining is centered, which brings in even more people. So it just kind of sees this unique boom with the influx of these other industries that all kind of happen because Trinidad is already established.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So they started the mining like in the 1870s or 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just visited the Steelworks Museum in Pueblo. They needed a way to transport all of that. And so they're the ones that built the railroad for that purpose, correct?
Correct. And, you also, by 1876, of course, Colorado becomes a state, but you still have New Mexico to the south that is still just a territory. you have more industry with mining and a lot of money to the north. So that's another reason why, railroads kind of stay in this concentrated area because that's really where they're needed between all of these different mining camps and the settlements that are sticking on this kind of eastern slope of Colorado within this new state.
Okay, great. How do you know how long Raton Pass was sort of managed by like Dick Wooten, where you had to pay a toll? At what point did that
Mhm.
sort of open up to sort of the public?
Right. I do think that came quite a bit later. I mean, Dick Wooten kind of stays as this very prominent figure in the area for quite a
Mhm.
while. Um, a relative, I believe it's actually a daughter of Dick Wooten, actually marries a son of Felipe Baca's. And it's this
Ooh.
like huge marriage in 1891 is the date on that. So it kind of stays this like very prominent spot within the area for a while.
I did try, that was kind of on my list for the trip that I just took, was to try to take the old Raton Pass and
Mm-hmm.
to see if there's anything left of Dick Wooten's, home or his toll gate or trading post or whatever. And it's from what I could tell online, there's not really anything left,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah,
it sounds like you can't really, it's a lot of private property. You can't really get through there anymore.
it is. Yeah, there's quite a bit of kind of privately owned land around that does have these kind of great, like fun landmarks on them. Um, but I know I've seen a photo of like Dick Wooten's original kind of homestead, and it is just this like very small house that he established just so he could kind of monetize that pass as people are traveling, and it like really works out for him.
Yeah, I've seen those pictures too, and I was just really wanting to catch some of that. But that's it. I got off on the exit that says Wooten,
Mm-hmm.
which is so funny because before I did any of my genealogy or knew any of my connections to the area, I used to pass through there all the time because I went to college in Colorado. And I remember seeing that sign all the time because it's an unusual spelling or unusual
Mm-hmm.
word, right?
Yeah.
And so I finally, this last month or whatever, I was like, I'm gonna finally exit here and just see. Surely they have like a historical marker or something. And nope, it's just literally two dead ends.
Mm-hmm.
So you just kind of have to just circle and just get right back on 25. But such a really interesting history. I've been meaning to read the biography on Dick Wooten.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you have the Santa Fe Trail too. So that seems like it just, there's such an intersection in Trinidad of different characters and also, just, with the mines brought in all these different people from different countries, different languages, different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Trinidad is known for its incredible architecture. Like, is that part of the reason why there's all that kind of diverse architecture was because of this influx of you have different perspectives, or was it just the wealth that was brought in because of the mining or
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely both. The Baca House that's part of our Trinidad History Museum. It is this two-story adobe structure with this tin roof. It's got a widow's walk, and it's this really interesting combination of adobe, which is this very traditional building material. It's just mud and sand and hay of the Southwest, plus this like Greek revival architecture that it's built in with the widow's walk at the very top and these very ornate um, like moldings along the side and things like that. So there is that wealth of kind of having this money to spend, wanting this large house, this kind of show of wealth. You then have kind of right next door for a while the Bloom Mansion, which is this three-story Victorian structure, red brick, this really intricate metalwork, things like that. That again was the Blooms were from Pennsylvania. They have this style in mind that they're used to, and they have a lot of money. They opened a mine in Trinidad. They were cattle ranchers. They owned general stores across the country. and they kind of built this large house. And so you do have these very wealthy people building in various styles across town, um, mainly from cattle ranching, mine owners, things like that. You also then have the Rapp brothers, which were very prominent architects at the time who built Temple Aaron, a really large ornate temple just a couple blocks back from the Blue Mansion. They built a couple churches in town, and they use different styles every single time. So that is one of the reasons why Trinidad has such unique architecture, because these architects didn't just kind of stick to one style. They
Mm.
really brought in different elements because there were so many different people in town who wanted different things, who were used to different materials, different architecture styles, had money to kind of build those things. And so it is a really unique mix of architecture kind of across the town, because you also see different areas springing up as you have different groups of people moving in.
Yeah, and in particular, of course, I'm most interested in the Hispano history or aspects in Trinidad. And in particular, Casimiro Barela is connected to my family. My one of my ancestors married his daughter, Juanita, and so just thinking about what a powerful. So I think he had two different Spanish language newspapers,
Mm-hmm.
which is really wild. I believe that no copies of those papers exist today.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I always hope that there's some old building somewhere where there's just a bunch of copies stored that just haven't been discovered or something. But it just really speaks to, I don't know, just like a community and a culture that's just really very vibrant to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was a state senator in Colorado for like 45 years, 42 years, I think. And he made sure that the state constitution was translated into Spanish
Mm-hmm.
so that the people in Southern Colorado, the Hispanos, could actually read the state constitution. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so what is the focus on some of that Hispano? Um, is it all at the museum? Do you sort of focus on like the Felipe Baca story, or are there other stories to tell?
I think there are definitely a lot of stories to tell because we have Felipe Baca's house as part of our complex. We definitely do tell a lot about him. But when you're looking at the Santa Fe Trail and settlement of Trinidad, there are so many other people that
Mm-hmm.
influence this area. Um, so I do think there are, even more stories to tell than, again, like we have this really great focal point to pull in Baca's story. Um, but you see like Barela, and I think Spanish, and I think I read he also had it translated in German as well, like
Mm-hmm.
because again there are so many people
Mm-hmm.
with different cultural backgrounds that are coming to this area, that people like Barela and like the Bacas, who both had a hand in legislation and education and things like that, really made a lot of like influential decisions that I don't know is always recognized today. And so, yeah, we do our best to really bring in all of those cultures and talk about them, because there's just so many important people that kind of founded, just like we talked about, it's still this really cool hub of all of these different cultures and people. It's still this pausing point where people kind of come in and just you can kind of see the influence all around.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I just remembered Rafael Chacon is another really influential Hispano leader he ended up in Trinidad. It seems like everybody kind of ends up in Trinidad, at least at one point or another. But so I just visited the museum for the first time, even though I've been to Trinidad a million times. I just finally got to the museum and loved it. I did miss the tour of the Baca House.
Mhm.
So I need to go back for that. But I really loved y'all had a good exhibits on the Santa Fe Trail and then like pulled out like some I thought really cool pieces of history like the I think you had something on like a midwife
Mhm.
from the area who delivered like some oh they've had like a quilt that was like images of all the some different people that this woman had brought into the world.
Mhm.
And I think you had like a little exhibit on remedios, like home remedies or folk
Mhm.
remedies that was sort of interactive. You could add yours, which I thought was cool. Um, so I thought I learned a lot. Um, it just in that, you have, I think it's like the Baca stables
Mhm.
in the back there that are devoted to the Santa Fe Trail stuff. So, and then some of the other just specific history. So I thought it was really cool. I'm excited to go back to learn more. What are some other things about the museum that people should look out for?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. That is our kind of it's borderlands of Colorado or borderlands of Southern Colorado, I should say, is this sort of exhibit series across several History Colorado museums in the area where we are diving into you have a lot of different cultures. We're on this border of um, the state, the US, Mexico, all of these different groups that are coming in and influencing the area. And so, in that health wellness in the borderlands, our Remedios exhibit, we do really look at what different remedies are different cultures bringing and sharing, and how does that influence kind of the public health of the area. And then when you bring in mining, when you bring in the railroad, when you bring in all of those different things, how does that change it? So that is one exhibit that we do really love. It is interactive, which is super fun. We then have our Santa Fe Trail exhibit, which does kind of walk you through the stages of the trail and stages of the people using the trail. So we really start the focus on the indigenous peoples who are establishing the trails, using them, who have homelands in the area, things like that. It then looks at Hispano settlement, it looks at white settlement, and then it kind of looks at sort of present day, like how do we get to a town of Trinidad. We then do have the Baca House, which we do tours of twice a day. And then we've got the Bloom Mansion, which the Blooms were cattle ranchers, merchants, miners, things like that. Um, and we have a couple exhibits in there. Our main one is the Women and Children of Ludlow, which talks about the Ludlow Massacre
Mm.
and the women and children who lost their lives, kind of what led up to that um, event and things like that in the Bloom. And then we've got some great photos from the Altman studio. Oliver Altman was a photographer in town for many, many years and took these incredible photographs that we just love putting in this Victorian house. And there are all these great Victorian portraits. So
Is there like a repository for all the Altman photos?
there is, we have quite a few of his glass negatives and quite a few of his prints and his studio set up at History Colorado. And then we also have this little research room that we're actually kind of reorganizing right now. And we talk about local families, local history, buildings, organizations in the area. And we have a lot of Altman kind of lists of who he took photos of, who paid for photos, what were they of, the families, things like that.
Wow, is that available online or do you have to like go and do the research room?
Yeah, our research room is kind of just by appointment. We're kind of in the process of starting to digitize some things because we'd love for it to be a lot more accessible, but currently it's in Frank Bloom's old office in his house. So we're kind of going through these filing cabinets and books and all of that fun stuff.
So is that, because I mean, I've seen those houses in Trinidad a million times. Were those the original locations? It really was the Baca House right there and the Bloom, like they weren't moved. That's really just where they were.
Yeah, they so the Baca House was built in 1870 by John Huff, actually. The Baca's original home was kind of closer to the river where they originally
Mm.
claimed land. But in 1873, Felipe Baca trades John Huff 22,000 pounds of wool for this adobe house. Um, and so they lived there for a while, and it's currently the oldest residential structure still standing in Trinidad. Um, and it was there for 12 years before the Blooms came in and built their home kind of further down the block.
Wow, that's fascinating. So now there's so much more going on in Trinidad. I ended up spending a couple of days there just because there was a lot going on. So much new. I mean, just talking about, that the river was a great place to rest. I mean, now you kind of have like this really nice like river area where you can kind of just sit and um lots of cool restaurants and coffee shops. And I'm still thinking probably every couple of days, I think about the gluten-free apple pie at, is it Coley's Bakery?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Still thinking about it. Um, so this really makes me happy as someone who's had connections to Trinidad for years, back in the day, seeing it be a little bit neglected and to see it just full of life again and really makes me happy. And part of that is like the Sister Blandina
Mm-hmm.
industrial complex, as I like to
Mm-hmm.
refer to it. That, there's just like um a source of tourism around, which a Sister Blandina was really cool. I thought she was really
Mm-hmm.
hilarious. I really love her story. So that's exciting too. So that's a piece of new stuff with Sister Blandina is like they're kind of some spots, hopefully maybe some interpretation around. Doesn't look like right now there's anything showing where the original church was or the school that she had a part in. But that might be another reason to visit Trinidad.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Just like we've been talking about, there's such cool history in the town that the community is so proud of that it is really exciting that there's so many other people that are interested in that and that we get to kind of show that off.
mhm. Okay, and then the last thing I thought about was the POW camp. Wasn't there a POW camp in Trinidad?
There was, yeah, Camp Trinidad, actually, I believe is what it was called.
Wow. So, from my understanding, there were quite a few POW camps out in the West, and that they really became sort of not so threatening, but more like integrated into the community. Like the prisoners would work on farms because there was a labor shortage.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would sort of integrate, and some of them, I think, even like stayed
Mm-hmm.
in those communities after the war.
Yeah, and from what I know about Camp Trinidad, that's one thing that we don't necessarily have anything about on display in the museum, but I know that we've had several people bring a lot of research to us. We sell a book about this camp that's very well researched,
Mm.
and we have a lot of that research donated back to us. But kind of just like you were saying, where it was sort of this like so far away from the conflict, so far away from everything, this long term thing where a lot of the prisoners did sort of, it was kind of lower security. Um, you get things like pamphlets on this play that the prisoners are going to put on, and they're going to go into town for this or that reason. And a couple of like reunions actually I know have happened where
Mm.
people have returned to Trinidad, kind of connected by this POW camp.
Wow. So fascinating.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this. There's just so much of Trinidad, and I'm so happy that it's kind of having a little bit of a renaissance right now, and that there's so many reasons to stop and stay a while. And are there still those trolley tours that used to be available?
There are, yeah, I'm not sure exactly when they start, but they definitely run throughout the summer and our warmer months. It'll kind of take you around town. They come right by the museum. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. As I was driving out of town, I think I saw the sign. I was like, ah, that's one thing I didn't do while I was there, but I'll just come back and get that apple pie. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Everybody go visit the museum. It's really great, has really awesome information. The Baca House tours are 11 and 1.
Mhm.
And then is the Blue Mansion always just open or is that by appointment too or
The Blue Mansion is kind of part of your general admission. It's also just self-guided, like our
okay.
exhibit space.
Okay. And then we can follow you all online as well for special events that I keep up with you all online to see any book club or special event stuff
Mhm.
that you have going on. So thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Luminaria. You can reach me at luminariapod@gmail.com. Our intro and outro music is of Varsoviana, performed by Nieves Anaya and his daughter Ernestina Anaya at Arroyo Hondo, New Mexico in 1940. It's part of the Juan Bautista Rael collection at the Library of Congress.